Welcome to Monday, January 26, 2026. If you or a loved one has suffered a tragic crash, get the firm with the most board-certified in trucking accident law attorneys, nationally renowned and located in Wyoming, Colorado, and Montana. Call Grant Lawson and the law firm for truck safety today. Well, the Arctic air is going to come off the Front Range and the Continental Divide, as there will be a bit of a consolidation of the Arctic air as the waves coming in from the northwest will put the central and eastern United States in more cold weather in the days ahead. But anytime Arctic air comes off the Front Range, the winds pick up. So we're starting the day with some very cold wind chills, some blowing snow in some areas, but we will see moderating temperatures along and east of the divide, but still very cold in the central and the eastern areas of the United States. Now, we're still going to be in a northwest flow pattern. So there's a couple of little waves coming through. One in particular, late Tuesday night and Wednesday, then sideswiped by another Arctic front coming into the northern plains as we get on into Friday and Saturday. But as been the theme all winter, it's going to continue to be the most action to the east of us, where the cold will just continue to be really quite intense all the way up through the end of the month. Then we're going to have a long-term discussion. Kind of take a look at February into early March and see what might be or what may not be in the cards. Beautiful shot there from western New Mexico. Beethoven the dog there wondering, what's this white stuff? Haven't seen it in a while. Richard reports that after that beautiful scene, the sun came out and most of that snow was gone, such as snow in New Mexico. But boy, the deep freeze. A lot of wintry photos coming in that we really haven't seen in quite a while. The deep freeze going far, far south. All of a sudden, there's ice on the North Platte River and an ice jam there along the Platte River Parkway in the Casper area along the North Platte. And even the antelope had to go out and find some grass and all of this. This was before the Arctic front. Notice Bill was noticing the different layers in clouds coming in from all different altitudes, and you'll see that along an Arctic wave, and ahead of it as you have different layers of moisture closer to the ground and higher up. And then a great shot of the inversion that set up in Cheyenne early this weekend as the Arctic air mass came in, and then you can see the steam from the stacks there coming up and hitting that inversion. Beautiful shot of the Wind River Mountains. Now, what's interesting about this shot is the Arctic air, as we know, was just kind of giving the Rockies a glancing blow. So there were times that Arctic air would push up and try to get over the Wind Rivers and couldn't quite do it most of the time. There's a good shot of the Arctic air mass coming down along the east slopes of the Bighorn Mountains. There's an Arctic scene out of Platte County, Wyoming, along the Laramie Range. Pillars. Yes, ice pillars, light pillars, where you get the small ice crystals and the small snowflakes, and you'll get those pillars to form. And boy, how about this for a shot out of Rawlins, Wyoming, with the Arctic temperatures and the deep freeze. Spectacular shot of the light pillars there. Basically, the light pillars will take on the shape of the commular, they're shaped like columns, the ice crystals are, when you get in the very cold temperatures like this. And so the light reflects the shape of those columns. Well, just before the storm, as it started to get going on Friday, the power outage map looked like this. So we had just under 40,000 late Friday afternoon, mostly in Texas and New Mexico from power outages. Then this is where we are this morning. Several times yesterday, the power outages across the South U.S. had gone well over 1 million, and there's still going to be plenty of problems today and the next couple of days, especially with severe cold and still very stormy weather in the northeastern United States. So you can see the map this morning. There's a lot of blue and pink as winter storm and very cold temperatures. We've got all of this dark blue and light blue is for severe cold. The pink is for the combination of snow and cold, and so New England really getting it. If you thought the snow was impressive during the Denver playoff game yesterday, well, if they had been playing in New England, it would have been under even heavier snowfall. As we take a look at the satellite imagery, we see this massive low out here in the Pacific, south of the Aleutians. And you might think, well, here it comes. No, it's going to be stuck there. We'll talk about that here in a minute. The eastern satellite photo, it doesn't look like a lot, But on the ground and close to the ground, you can see the blue here and the lighter colors. And then here's another push of Arctic air right up there coming into the northern plains and the Great Lakes, reinforcing the cold air in Florida, which had been able to escape the cold. In fact, temperatures in Florida were in the 80s while it was snowing and sleeting and freezing rain in Atlanta. But they're going to run out of their luck as well, as you'll see here in a moment. As of about midnight this past night, you can see how far the sub-zero temperatures had gotten into West Texas and eastern New Mexico. Where you see gray, it's sub-zero. We see the blue here. You're talking 20 degrees below zero or colder. So this cold core of air is heading and advancing south and east. Look at the temperatures in Texas this morning. Freezing temperatures all the way down into Houston, even into the lower 40s there, out into the Gulf. So we're going to get freezing temperatures all the way in the northeast Mexico with this. Look at these sub-zero temperatures in Roswell. So you're talking about a deep south penetration here of the cold. As we go through the week, this is where we're going to be to start the week. You can see the lobe of cold air right here. That's going to reinforce the cold. We've got this high pressure ridge along the west coast and that big low spinning out in the Pacific. But there's this little ripple right here. You see that little ripple? That's going to come through later today into Tuesday, producing some high mountain snow showers. And then a bigger ripple will come in behind that. So if we look at the temperature anomalies by 11 a.m. Mountain Time today, you can see the coldest of cold is definitely in the center of the country. You can see this little streak of orange coming in. So we're starting to see the Arctic air retreat and get a little bit of a chinook, hence the winds will be picking up. By tomorrow, you can see that the warmer air is coming off the Pacific and pushing off the Front Range, but you can see the cold is locked. The cold is completely locked in east of the Rockies, from Florida to Texas, from Michigan to Maine, all the way up to Saskatchewan and Manitoba. The cold is going to be very intense. This is by Friday. Here's the side swipe we talked about. There's going to be a side swipe of Arctic air coming into maybe to the Front Range again as we get to the end of the week. But look at all the purple. I mean, this is multiple days here of far below temperatures over a huge swath of the United States. The exception is west of the divide, of course. Natural gas prices have responded. Look at this spike that has occurred here in natural gas markets. Oh, not too long ago, natural gas was around $3.22. So a $3, almost a doubling in natural gas prices in response to this cold. We talked about when Arctic air leaves, you get wind. So the wind gaps along Interstate 80, I-25 here, it is going to be windy today. Strong gusty winds will cause blowing snow and some travel headaches along Interstate 80 today. Keep that in mind. In the mountain passes of Colorado as well, and even along sections of Interstate 70. It's a rule of thumb, like death and taxes. When Arctic air retreats to the east, along the Continental Divide, you're going to get wind as there's a big vacuum, so to speak, as that Arctic air pushes away and you get a big air pressure change. So as we get to the middle of the week, there's that little wave I showed you coming in through the high pressure ridge. Doesn't look like much, but it is going to produce a little bit of weather. Arctic air still has easy access into the central and the eastern areas of the United States. That big low out in the Pacific just sits there and spins and even consolidates a little bit more and goes up to just west of Alaska, affecting Alaska with some bad weather. As we get into Friday, we see the last salvo of Arctic air with this Arctic tail coming into Wisconsin and Minnesota, pushing some of that Arctic air a little bit westward. Not as big of a push that we have just seen. But the combination of this little wave right here and a little bit of upslope from this Arctic push is going to produce a little bit of weather for some of you here by the end of the week. As we get into Tuesday night, Wednesday, and Thursday, we're going to get sideswiped with some light snow here from eastern Montana through the western Dakotas into Nebraska and northeastern Wyoming. The mountains of southern Wyoming, western Wyoming will get into a little bit of snow. Nothing to write home about, but you can see some moisture pushing into the Pacific Northwest again. This isn't going to be much, but there is going to be a little bit of wintry weather during the second half of the week with this sideswiping Arctic front and this little Pacific wave coming on through. So what happens after that? Well, on Tuesday of next week, there's another northwest flow low. So this could do something similar to this around Tuesday of next week. And this will, again, keep colder air flowing into the central and eastern United States while we've got this high pressure ridge developing along the west coast. Notice the low in the Pacific isn't going anywhere. It's stalled out. So we're kind of in a pattern here through the next week or so that on the whole isn't going to change much. Cold in the central and the east, northwest flow along the divide with small weather disturbances, generally fair weather across the west coast. What happens after that? Well, as we get into the longer term, look at this high pressure ridge build in again across the west. So this is by late next week, February 5th. So the cold continues in the Great Lakes in the east, and you might be saying, well, here we go again. Another big western ridge, and that is a big western ridge again. Wow, here we go. Is this going to lock in for weeks on end again and basically put winter to bed and say it's over? Well, as the Sports Atlantis Lee Corso would say, not so fast, my friend. This high pressure ridge certainly is going to build in, but its lifespan is likely going to be short. Why? Well, we're likely going to see a retrograding pattern of this low retreating further west and a reconsolidation of the polar vortex that will likely wobble to the west as well. Why do we say that? Well, there's a couple of things going on, actually multiple things going on, that would indicate a shift in the weather. So this is by the 5th of February. This is going out all the way to the 10th of February. What you see here is the high pressure over Washington and Oregon and Idaho retrograde to the high pressure ridge more into the eastern Pacific. And what do you see right here? You see a trough coming into the Pacific Northwest, splitting into the vortex here, and we have a pocket of very cold air retreating back up into the Northwest Territories in the North Slope of Alaska. Now, you have every right and every good reason to be skeptical that this would happen because Lucy's pulled the football away before. But there's some other things going on here, and I'll probably show this to you tomorrow. Remember I talked about the 2010 analog, the winter of 2010 and 11. Well, the February of 2011 suddenly turned cold and stayed cold, and it got stormy for February, March, and especially into April. And things changed. The weather changed. It went into a more of a wintry weather pattern in the west. So there's some analog support, but is there support elsewhere? So I'm going to take you through what we call the European weeklies. Now, I do this with much trepidation because I show this to you and certainly things can change. It's a model. Take models not at face value, but with a grain of salt. As I say all the time, models are tools. They're not reality. They're trying to explain what could happen with the atmosphere over time. And obviously, the further out you go in time, the error rate goes up. But from a big picture situation, I just want to step through the next 6 weeks for you. So this is February 5th, and here's that very big high pressure ridge. When you see the red on the right side of the high pressure ridge, this means that this is a dynamically unstable ridge over time. That's why I'm saying that the high pressure ridge is not likely to last weeks on end. If we saw this bright red more centered over here, be a little bit of a different story. There's your big low that's out in the eastern Pacific that's going to be stuck. So the European, which tries to go out here 6 weeks in advance, is showing that big ridge on February 5th. Now, as we go a week later, notice it's gone. And I want you to look at the difference in colors. Look up by the illusions. See the blue? The blue goes to light yellow. Then the red over the Rockies turns white and blue. So what we're seeing here is a retrograding of the high over here, a displacement of the colder air back here and into the west. So if you want to look at the calendar and say, well, when could winter come in finally in the west? Maybe it's around the 10th or the 12th. Again, I'm doing this with much trepidation because I know there's a lot of you out there that are just losing your minds because we haven't locked in a winter. or even had anything remotely to winter. So again, I'm taking a big risk here. So let's go out a week further. So for the 19th of February, we've got the ridge back up into here, and we've got the blue covering a good part of the nation. We go out to the 26th, the ridge is still there, white and blue over most of the nation. That's a cold signal. This is for March 3rd. Ridge is still there, white and blue over the west, still a cold signal. March 10th, ridge is still there, blue and white, still a cold signal. Is there any support for this in some of the teleconnections we use? Now, sometimes we talk about the Madden-Julian oscillation, the oscillations that take place between pressure patterns in the Pacific and the Indian Ocean, which sometimes is a good guide, sometimes it's not. This winter, the MGO has not always synced up with reality. So again, I have to caution you, take this with a grain of salt, but there is support from the Madden-Julian oscillation in the longer term to go to what I just showed you. So these dates, these are dates, these numbers. So here we are on the 26th. We're in phase 7. As we go over time, the red line, which are the dates, okay, you see the 30th right here? We're going through, and here are your phase numbers right here. So right now we're in 7, going into 8. And as we go into February, we rotate into 1, then we rotate into 2, and then you see how it spins around. We lock into 3, 2, and maybe going over into 3 right here. So what you do now is you look at your analog tools and say, well, what happens when we go from phase 1 to phase 2 to phase 3? The left side are temperature anomalies. So phase 1 is cold for a lot of the country. You can see there's a little bit of a Chinooking effect when we look at the Madden-Julian oscillation in a phase 1 up in the northern Rockies and northern plains. But if we go to phase 2 and phase 3, the analog tools, which basically what this means is this is what happens in February, March, and April when we're in phases 1, 2, and 3. This is usually what happens. It doesn't say it will happen. It's what usually happens. That's why we use these tools as a general overall guide. When we look at phase 1, 2, and 3 with precipitation, where you see the green, you're above average, where you see the brown, you're below average, and white, you're near average. And again, these are general trends, but phase 1, 2, and 3 for the western United States is certainly more wet, or has the potential to be more wet than what we have seen all winter season in the west. So if we take this, let's just make the assumption that the Madden-Julian oscillation and the European weekly tools are going to end up being somewhat correct. What that means is this is somewhat optimistic for parts of the western United States to get back into some better chances of precipitation as we get into the phases. Right now, it looks like we'll spend most of our time in phase 2 for the last 3 weeks of February and at least for the first 2 weeks of March. Take that for what you will. I'm not saying it's going to happen. I'm showing you what I see. Time will tell. Have yourself a good Monday. We'll see you tomorrow.